Herzlich willkommen, liebes Publikum hier im Körber-Forum heute Abend. Mein Name ist Julia Ganter, ich bin Programmleiterin für internationale Politik hier bei der Körber-Stiftung und werde die Veranstaltung heute Abend moderieren. Jetzt spreche ich Deutsch. Wenn wir unsere Diskussion beginnen, dann werden wir Englisch sprechen, da wir zwei Sprecherinnen heute Abend hier aus Indien zu Gast haben. Wenn Sie also noch kein Übersetzungsgerät haben, dann melden Sie sich gerne bei den Kolleginnen und organisieren sich noch eins. And for those of you who are English speakers or joining us online, the first bit, the introduction will be in German and then we switch to English for the rest of our discussion. Deutschland und Indien, gemeinsam durch unsichere Zeiten, so haben wir den heutigen Abend überschrieben. Und vermutlich geht es Ihnen und mir gleich, wenn wir im Moment den Fernseher einschalten oder das Radio oder auch durch die Nachrichten lesen. Eine Ausweitung der Eskalation im Nahen und Mittleren Osten begegnet uns da, ein Waffenstillstand, der nicht so richtig auf stabilen Beinen zu stehen scheint mit dem Iran. Der Angriffskrieg in der Ukraine, auch hier nicht wirklich Frieden in Sicht. Und dann haben wir da noch die älteste Demokratie der Welt, die gerade eher zu erodieren scheint. Und natürlich gibt es noch den Klimawandel und viele Krisen und Konflikte, die ich jetzt gar nicht genannt habe. Der Bundeskanzler Friedrich Merz hat heute in seiner Regierungserklärung gesagt, wir können nicht damit rechnen, dass die Welt um uns herum alsbald wieder dauerhaft zu ruhigeren Zeiten zurückkehrt. Unsichere Zeiten also. Und genau darüber wollen wir sprechen. Eins ist klar, Deutschland kann mit diesen unsicheren Zeiten nicht alleine umgehen. Dafür brauchen wir internationale Partner. Und auf einen wollen wir heute Abend ganz besonders schauen, nämlich Indien. Indien, die fünftgrößte Volkswirtschaft der Welt, das bevölkerungsreichste Land mit der viertgrößten Armee. Und wir sind schon seit 25 Jahren, Deutschland und Indien, strategische Partner. Auch wenn, vermutlich geht es einigen hier so, Indien erst eher in der kürzeren Vergangenheit so richtig auf dem Radar hier in Deutschland erschienen ist, als Partner auf der politischen Bühne. In der Indien-Strategie der Bundesregierung, da heißt es, Deutschland sollte die Zusammenarbeit mit Indien stärker als bisher als Chance und auch für die Erreichung unserer eigenen Ziele begreifen. Indien scheint also der Partner der Stunde zu sein. Und auch deswegen hat man gestern im Rathaus in Hamburg die India Week eröffnet, eine Woche voller Veranstaltungen zu Indien, zu unserer Partnerschaft mit Indien, in deren Rahmen auch die Abendveranstaltung heute hier stattfindet. Und auch als Körber-Stiftung, da schauen wir schon länger recht intensiv auf Indien, zum Beispiel in unserer Initiative der aufstrebenden Mittelmächte. Vielleicht haben Sie am Eingang schon gesehen, dass da ein Bericht ausliegt. Das ist der zweite Bericht, den wir rausgebracht haben in dieser Initiative. Sie dürfen sich gerne ein Exemplar mitnehmen, wenn Sie das interessiert, zum Lesen zu Hause. Trotz der schwierigen Nachrichtenlage, mit der ich gleich eingestiegen bin, Entschuldigung dafür, wollen wir auch einen optimistischen Blick auf die Weltlage setzen und haben dafür 3 Gäste heute Abend hier eingeladen. Bevor ich diese gleich vorstelle und zu mir auf die Bühne hole, möchte ich Ihnen noch sagen, wie wir den heutigen Abend bestreiten wollen. Wir werden uns erst für ungefähr eine Stunde gemeinsam unterhalten und dann haben Sie Gelegenheit, auch Ihre Fragen zu stellen. Sie können sich jetzt schon mal im Verlauf der Unterhaltung überlegen, was das denn so ist, was Ihnen unter den Nägeln brennt und Sie fragen wollen. Und, ich hoffe, das auch in Ihrem Sinne, in der Anfangsstunde können Sie sich nicht nur zurücklehnen, sondern wir werden auch zwischendurch immer wieder mal Aussagen hier auf dem Screen hinter mir zeigen. Und vielleicht haben Sie sich schon gefragt, was die grünen und roten Karten sollen, die auf Ihrem Sitz liegen. Wir wollen Sie gerne mit einbeziehen in unsere Unterhaltung und immer wenn wir diese Aussagen zeigen, können Sie entweder Ihre grüne Karte hochhalten, wenn Sie der Aussage zustimmen, oder Ihre rote Karte, wenn Sie der Aussage nicht zustimmen. Aber ich erkläre es dann nochmal, wenn es soweit ist. Damit würde ich sagen, sind wir soweit vorbereitet und können starten. Und ich begrüße unsere Gäste und wechsle jetzt auch ins Englische. I'm going to switch to English now to welcome our guests. Please welcome with me Priyanka Chaturvedi. She's a member of the Indian Upper House and also deputy leader of the opposition party Shiv Sena. She just came back from several trips to different European countries, so I'm excited to hear more about that today too. Please welcome with me also Erik Kurzweil. He is Director for Indo-Pacific Policy, South Asia and Afghanistan at the German Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. His career as a diplomat has brought him not only to Washington and other places, but also New Delhi, and he's a historian by training. And last but not least, please welcome with me Ambika Vishwanath. She is co-founder and director of the India-based geopolitical advisory group, Cuba 9 Initiative, and she had by far the longest travel to come here because she currently serves as research fellow at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. So, I'm excited to have you all here, and I want to start with a little bit of a metaphorical question in the beginning, because I learned that on Saturday was International Yoga Day, and I think I don't need to explain the link between yoga and India. So if you had to describe the relationship between Germany and India as a style of yoga, I admit it's a little bit westernized styles of yoga that I'm going to cite now. Which one would you choose because you think it would fit best? Is it either yin yoga, that is characterized by slow but long-lasting movements? Is it vinyasa yoga, a very dynamic yoga with focus on synchronization of movements? Or would it be rather acro yoga, that combines yoga with acrobatics and involves some risk? Or hot yoga, a very intense and sometimes overheated style of yoga. Priyanka, which one would you choose?
These are the 4 versions I'm hearing for the first time. But I would go with Vinyasa yoga, which is dynamic in terms of relationship, but is also intense and synchronized. And I think India-Germany relationship is best described with the synchronicity that we have in the terms of commonalities of what we share.
Okay. Erik, what is your view? Which one do you choose?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you look on the long term or on the medium term. I think in the long term, it's probably rather the first one, that it has been long development between Germany and India. But over the past 2 years, I'd say it's really vinyasa because it's become very dynamic and hopefully not painful. Yeah.
Okay. Ambika, which one would you choose?
Yeah. Thank you. I think I have to say yin yoga, more than one level above yin yoga, but not quite yet the vinyasa. In that I will disagree with Priyanka that I don't think we have that level of synchronization yet. We have pretty divergent views on many things, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so hence the yin yoga part, because there is some good yin yang, I think, in the relationship.
Okay.
But we haven't gone beyond that.
Yeah. Okay, good. There's not only agreement on stage. That's good to start with. And it also leads me to my next question, Erik, because you mentioned yin yoga, and when the Indian foreign minister visited Germany in May, he reflected on this year's 25th anniversary of strategic partnership between India and Germany, saying that many things have gone well. Maybe we have not fully realized the potential of our ties. So maybe you can explain a little bit better what you've already touched up on with the first question. What is Germany's view on his assessment? Do you agree with this?
Well, I certainly agree with him to the extent that the potential of our partnership has not been fully explored over the past 25 years. I think when we went into this partnership, there was an understanding that India is a country with a lot of potential for us, a lot of potential for itself too, but we looked at it from the perspective of German interest, of course, and over these 25 years, I think for a long time, the energy that has gone into making this concrete and into finding ways of how we can really find common interests and build on them and go further than we had already was not enough on both sides, I would say. And when we are now at a different stage, I think it is mostly due to the fact that we've both understood that in the current world we need different partners and more partners than we had before, that we have to diversify, as it is so often said now, and find ways of including countries like India that have another access to the world, that look differently at the global south, for instance, that are not necessarily partners in each and every topic with us and do not necessarily share our worldview to an extent that we may find in the European Union, because we came from the same history and have shared this for 50 years already. But we do have interests that make us move towards each other and that will hopefully help us through the very turbulent times that we live in.
Sounds like there is some dynamic involved at the moment. And if I read through the German-India strategy, there is one goal defined that is to bring about a shift in the perception of India and Germany that reflects its relevance. Priyanka, what would be a perception of India looking like that truly reflects its relevance at the moment? Like, how should our perception shift to look at India?
No, I think the perception has quite radically shifted because we suddenly have a lot of conversations that are happening and we're moving towards dynamism, because most of the countries have realized that India values friendships, India values strategic partnerships, India values democratic values because inherently we are democratic. We are such a diverse nation with different languages that we speak across borders, and yet we stay united in our intent to take the country forward. And also believing in the idea, which is a long-held value system for us, value-based idea for us, which is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is the world is one family, and when we grow, we take the world along with us. And when he mentioned Global South, I must mention that it was India that took the leadership role, whether it was during COVID, whether it was to bring the African Union into the G20, as well as various other challenges that Global South is facing, or even getting Global South into conversation power tables of Europe and the US, which has long been ignored. So I guess even Europe is understanding the relevance of a country which believes in stability, which believes in growth for all, which believes in following the international rules-based order, and is also very keen on ensuring that we avoid conflicts and we converge rather than diverge on issues that probably are better suited for humanity. So I think that is what is the realization which we are seeing coming from across nations, and that is why we are suddenly seeing the dynamism in the relationship. And I think this dynamism is only going to lead for better outcomes, for a better tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Ambika, before I turn to you again, I want to announce what I just said. Oh, yeah. The first one. I've already explained in the beginning, now it's already your turn. So the first statement I would be curious to see your feeling on is I am optimistic when I think about my own future. So red card if you're not, and green card if you are.
But Yulia, you didn't give us any cards.
What do I do?
Do you want to vote too?
Why not?
If we have some more, then we'll get some for you too.
I see optimism.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you can take mine, of course. And then we just need to, thank you so much. Crowd effort, thank you.
I guess I go with the flow.
So I see many green cards and only green cards on stage. Okay, does it change if I ask you about, I'm optimistic when I think about the future of society. Cards up again.
So we are all optimistic people here.
So I have 3 optimists on the panel, that's good to know, but I have a more mixed group here. I see more red cards now than I saw in for the first question. Thank you. This is interesting to see because there's a difference between the personal outlook in the future here in the audience and the outlook when it comes to society as a whole. Ambika, it partly reflects how Germans, when we look at statistics, look at the future, because only less than 40% of Germans look at the future with optimism. However, this is in a sharp contrast to India, which ranks consistently high on global optimism indexes. So I was wondering, when we talk about the uncertain world, what makes Indians so optimistic?
How long do we have?
That's a very psychological one.
I think there would be a few different reasons as to why Indians are optimistic. One would probably be if you were to ask a younger person in India, India now has got more potential than it's ever had before. And that potential, I feel like, is for anybody. I mean, with, of course, some caveats to that, but more so than it might have been when, I was a slightly younger person. And that, I would say that in terms of potential of where you want to study or what you want to study. In the 90s, when I went to college, what you wanted to study were very specific things. Now you can study so many other things. That, I think, gives people optimism to a certain level. What kind of job you want to have. To a certain extent, whom you want to marry and live with as well. I know there's a lot of questions around that, but it's more so now. So relative to where India has been, I feel like society, in what you can do in your future, there is a lot of optimism in terms of my choices. And so that's probably what makes a good portion of the country feel more hopeful, which probably then translates to what you are seeing as optimism. I think, but if you were to put that in the global context, it's also more in India because that potential of choice of what I can be, what I can become, what I can do is probably more than several other countries at this moment in time. And so that also then translates to some amount of optimism. Mm-hmm. And then there's other factors, right? There's the financial factors, economic growth factors, the fact that you go, I mean, Indians are everywhere, but whom you see everywhere has changing. That potential is increasing. People want to now come to India more than they have in the past. People want to work with India. So I think there's a number of different spaces and how you would come at it. But by and large, it's that potential of choice.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned economic growth. So while the Indian economic outlook is more positive, global growth is at its lowest pace since 2008 at the moment, excluding some global recessions that happened in 2009 and 2020. Germany at the moment is the 3rd largest and India the 5th largest economy. So do you have some ideas how these two economic powerhouses together could strengthen the global growth and reduce uncertainty?
The global growth, I think that's a hard question to answer, right? India and Germany have a lot of potential in what we can do bilaterally. But I go back to then my answer of why we are still a little above the yin-yang phase, the yin-yoga phase, and not quite at that vinyasa phase, because I don't think we have fully realized our potential of partnership. So while we do have the ability to move the needle on certain aspects of what economic growth looks like in terms of manufacturing, in terms of creating skilled labor. This is our biggest economic partnership between the two is on increasing the skilled labor at both ends. The Make in India Mittelstand program, I mean, that could be huge. But it's still something that's going to have second and third order effects, either for immediate region, so in Europe, or in the neighborhood. But it's not really going to have huge, fourth order effects for then the larger global system. I do not think both our economies are at that level yet, and I do not think our partnership is at that level either. It can be if we were to then ramp up everything that we have done to a much higher degree, and that would then have to be partnerships that go beyond what we are doing right now on the trade or on the skills, but go into other areas that we are still sticky about. And so that would then be things like defense, more cooperation on foreign affairs globally, and things like that, yeah.
And we will talk about that. I just mentioned global growth because I want to talk with you about some different factors of uncertainty, and economic development certainly is one of them. Now, a group that is trying to also focus on global growth outlook is certainly the G7, the group of the 6 major industrial countries and the EU. And G7 leaders met last week in Canada. India participated as guest country for the 6th time. Now, India is supposed to become the 3rd largest economy before 2030. Eric, Germany is part of G7. Why is India not invited to become a formal member?
Well, I mean, if
I'd love to hear that.
I mean, if I wrote the invitations, perhaps it would be. But well, I mean, it's a club that has chosen to invite India over the past few meetings every single time in attendance for it to become the 3rd largest economy, which of course for Germany is not such an easy thing to conceive, right? Because we are in that place now. So basically only seeing the positive part of it from a German perspective is hard. And on the other hand, I think we have the responsibility for ourselves, of course, as has India. So trying to find ways to remain in one of the top places for us is very important. And I think that India can actually help us to remain there. And that's why India is invited to the G7 meetings. Because also the other partners there understand that the role of India is a role that is constructive in the overall scheme of things. For us, there's certain endeavors in which we have not been very strong so far. When it comes to new technologies, for instance, to AI, when it comes to semiconductor production, when it comes to the services that India provides to the whole world in terms of computer services and digital services. In all these areas, we can learn a lot, and we can also collaborate and cooperate, because while India has this entrepreneurial spirit in taking these things forward, we have still very, very good universities. We have extremely capable startups that often cooperate with Indian startups already. And we see that somehow we have to catch up in ways that alone we would probably not be able to do in the foreseeable future, or not fast enough. So there's many others. There's cooperation on climate-related industries and economy, but defense was mentioned already. All of this is not really explored yet to the extent that it would need to keep us also in a top position, which is more of my concern than India, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm. Ambika already mentioned before the bilateral angle, when we talk about trade, India is only Germany's 23rd largest trading partner, which is surprising given the size of the country and its dynamic economy. This can explained by many factors, but one might also be the absence of a free trade agreement between Europe and India, and negotiations started in 2007, so many, many years ago. They paused in between, and now, rather recently, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, she brought 21 of her 27 commissioners, so it's a lot. If you ever try to find a date with your friends, imagine 21 commissioners traveling to India. That was quite an effort. So she brought them all to India earlier this year, and during this visit, she set a goal with the Prime Minister Modi to finalize the FTA by the end of this year. Priyanka, do you think that political will alone will be enough to reach this goal, or how optimistic, you showed that you're an optimist before, are you about this, that EU-India achieved this goal?
So I'd like to begin with the word that he used, which was constructive. India has played a very constructive role. And I think it's out of that constructive spirit that we believe in, and Indians per se believe in. We are not destructive. India has never waged a war against anybody, ever. We've only reacted to any violent attack that has come our way or terrorism that has come our way. So a constructive economy, a constructive nation, a nation which thinks optimistically, is going to be a stable partner in your development growth story also. That is one important factor which we need to realize. Let me just bring that perspective about trade. While for Germany, we might be 23rd, but for India, Germany is at number 8. It has risen from number 12 to number 8. Our trade hit an all-time high of about, I think, $34.58 billion, which was this year, between 24-25. And moving forward, we are the largest Germany is the largest trading partners for us in EU. So yes, it absolutely works for us. It's not just the political will, but the need of the hour. India is right now the 4th largest economy. Germany is at number 3. A 3 and 4 getting together and using their powers, collaborating, to make not just take a role for just about India and Germany. I'm talking about a global order. Reinforcing the belief in how democracies can achieve a growth which right now seems very unstable. You look at the Middle East region right now, you look at what's happening between Israel, Iran, and Palestine, then you look at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and this is what brings you hope. So it's not just about political will, but about the sense of urgency of putting a different narrative to the people of the world. All the red cards that you saw should turn to green because of this FTA. So there are people who are committed to this, there is a political will committed to it, and like you said, the European commissioners are all visiting in one go for the first time ever. So you can see the intent behind it. So I'm very certain that together we can create a whole new story for our youth, for tech, for collaborations in military as well as intelligence. Again, like I mentioned, when you mentioned about the G7, India is still not a permanent member at the UNSC. We would want countries which are part of the UNSC to speak for that 1.4 billion people back home in India, who are the 4th largest economic powers in the world, to be at that decision-making table. So are these particular groups not open to reality? Is something that I would like to ask the world. So while we continue to collaborate, we continue to set a whole new narrative, which is our priority as well, it should become a priority for the whole world to see.
Mm-hmm. But with regards to the FTA,
it is going to happen before the end of this year.
Okay.
Still
an optimist. Still an optimist. Okay. Let's talk about someone who is putting a lot of pressure on international trade and maybe raises the sense of urgency also when it comes to the EU-India free trade agreement. Donald Trump, and I have prepared another statement for the audience, which is, and of course now also for the panel, Donald Trump is currently causing the greatest uncertainty in the world. I see some green.
Is it a yes or no?
Green is yes, and red is no. Green is yes.
He's bringing peace to the world.
So I see a lot of green. And one red. Okay.
That wasn't surprising at all.
So I'll get back to that in a second. But first, I want to turn to you, Ambika, because in our Emerging Middle Powers survey that we also did with experts in India, 55% of Indian experts and policymakers, they rated the global influence of the US as positive, and this was shortly before and shortly after the US election last year. So quite a few things have happened since then. For example, the threat of 26% tariffs, which India currently tries to negotiate with the United States. How would you describe the current state of the US-India relations? I saw that both of you have raised green cards, so you think that Donald Trump is currently causing the greatest uncertainty in the world.
So what is the state of US-India relations at the moment?
Do you think it has changed? Because in last year, Indian experts were quite optimistic, 55%. I can also give you some insights on the report. We have also asked South Africans and Brazilians, and there only 39–40% of respondents shared this view. So India, compared to other powers of the global south, is way more optimistic or way more positive about US global influence.
I mean, I think some part of that harks back to the fact that for India, who occupies the White House is not that much of an issue because we have very good bipartisan support in Congress. So even when there has been a Democrat in the White House and in the past Republicans, the relationship with India hasn't shifted so drastically. When you look at it from a nitty-gritty perspective, I'm not talking about it from a perspective of who's hugging whom in the media and throwing big stadium parties for each other. I'm not talking about that kind of relationship. I'm talking about actually the relationship that's happening between the policymakers at both ends, and whether it's been on people-to-people ties, more towards recently a lot of very interesting development on tech, for example, right? So I think that optimism towards our relationship with America stems from the fact that we view very strong bipartisan support from the US. And that's vice versa as well. Now, on some things that might be up and down, but by and large, that's there. So that 55%, I would categorize as probably related to that. The US has always also, to a certain extent, been the largest market for Indians, whether it is Indians to go to study, to work, to explore opportunity, innovation, and things like that. Germany is now becoming a very big market for Indians in that sense, but the US has traditionally been the place where we go, other than the UK. And so we have to see the US as a for us still, it is a place to be and a place to go, that dream to a certain extent, I would say. I'd be interested to know if you were to conduct this poll right now, today, given all the disruptions that happened yesterday, what that view looks like. I feel like there might be some changes as to what the relationship is, because many Indians feel like they didn't get the support from America that they should have gotten after the recent attack in Kashmir, and that there was too much public discussion by the president of the US, which was clearly not correct from the Indian side, right? So I think there's that. Then there's also the fact that there is the tariffs. There's also the fact of the visas that have now been reduced, closed in some cases, requests that you have to have your social media accounts completely open if you want a certain type of visa, universities that are not being allowed to give visas, so there's a whole lot of other things that are going on. And so I think we might be a bit hesitant, but if you were to still look at it from that umbrella perspective, zoom out, I do not think that 55% will change too drastically, because America is still seen as, the place that you want to have that partnership with. Is that correct or wrong? I mean, I'm not going to comment on that from the perspective of 1.4 billion people. From my side, I think we need to diversify as well, much more.
Eric, you've raised a red card. So first of all, I want to know what you think is the greatest uncertainty, or what is causing the greatest uncertainty. And then I would also be interested to hear from you, because obviously there is an opposing view on this here on the panel. And I take it as a reflection also of an official position. Does it make a difference for the Indian-German partnership that views on the US are different in India and in Germany?
Well, first of all, I mean, of course, I'm sitting here as a diplomat and as a representative of the government, so I would hesitate actually to blame one person or one politician, one partner country to be the source of all uncertainty in the world at the moment, because I really do believe that there are several sources of uncertainty that have to be taken very seriously by us. That would heighten the effect of all the others. Yeah, there's of course Trump and the US and the changes in America, the changes in our alliance as well, on which we have relied for such a long time. But there's also an ever more assertive China. There is a very aggressive Russia in our neighborhood. And there is also the conflict in the Middle East, on which I do not want to comment in detail now because it's not our topic. But all of this, of course, gives us a feeling of uncertainty that my generation and probably most of the people here in this hall have not known during their lifetime, which also explains to an extent why for Germans, I think it is, when they look at the world, a bit difficult to be entirely optimistic at the moment. I think optimism comes from a reflection of one's own strengths, which we have to do, and for that we perhaps need to be almost grateful that the situation in the world has forced us to really question whether we are prepared for difficult situations and whether we are able to stand up on our own and with our European and other partners to the challenges that the world poses before us. And I suppose the answer would be no. If we want to do that now, we need countries like India coming back to that. And I think it is not a problem that India views the world differently. Of course, we're coming from a totally different past and history. I think the optimism is entirely justified when you have a young country that sees that over a few years it is ever more stronger, ever stronger than it used to be. It offers chances to millions and millions of people who had very little chances for development in their own lifetime and for their families. While we come from, to be honest, a pretty privileged situation where it is also justified somehow to be afraid of future loss. Yeah? I think that might be a topic later perhaps, but a sense of sharing in the world is probably becoming more important, and we need to accept also that we will not be in the future the only ones who have a relatively comfortable lifestyle. Everybody aspires to it, and to achieve it for many, we will have to give something, and the others are also allowed to take something.
Thank you. Let's talk about the next factor of uncertainty, which is our different regions and neighborhoods. Priyanka, in April, 26 people were killed in a terrorist attack in Kashmir, which is a disputed region in northwest India. India holds Pakistan responsible for the attack, but Pakistan denies this. And India responded with Operation Sindoor to target terrorists. Now, you recently took part in one of several multi-party delegations. Altogether, these delegations traveled to 33 global capitals. I'm wondering, why did you and other members of parliament in India felt the need to travel outside of India and talk about this 4-day conflict in Europe.
Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to clarify one thing. The green card I showed, you can also look at it about Donald Trump and uncertainties from a point of me being a member of the opposition back home in India. Not a part of the government. So having said that, now with regards to dispute, let me be very, very clear as an Indian that there is no dispute with regards to Kashmir. The only dispute being Pakistan having occupied our part of Kashmir, which they need to return back to us. That's the only dispute that needs to be settled. That's part one. Second reason that you asked me, why did we undertake such a massive exercise to reach out to the world? Let me also be very clear, we were not trying and asking them that please come support and call out Pakistan. For 7 decades, India has been fighting this fight with our western border being troubled at all times, facing terrorism. I come from the city of Mumbai, which saw the worst terror attack ever that India had to witness. Over 170 people died, out of which they were not just Indians, they were Americans, they were Europeans, they were from Israel, and several other parts of the world. And everyone who was through a process of investigation during 26/11, everyone that was found guilty had got their trainings in Pakistan. Let's also not forget Al-Qaeda, which was behind a lot of terrorism activities, starting from 9/11 to various activities across Europe. The man behind it was found hiding in Pakistan. While Pakistan was telling the world that it's cooperating with the United States of America in hunting down Osama bin Laden and cracking down on terror, they were actively hiding the most wanted terrorist of the world, Mr. Osama bin Laden. And he was killed there in an operation by America in Abbottabad. And that's a fact that history cannot deny, the world cannot deny. What happened in April? We've seen Article 370, a removal of Article 370, which has truly integrated Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of the country. We saw tourism at its peak, terrorism at its lowest, and Pakistan unable to digest the fact, again with only one-point agenda to attack stability in our part of the world, part of the country, because we are doing economically well. Our youth is looking forward to a better tomorrow, to destabilize that. Why we undertook this delegation, like I said, was not for just support, but to make you all aware that what we are facing back home is coming to your doorstep soon because of the radicalization, indoctrination, which is actively supported by the Pakistani army, which is actually the de facto boss of Pakistan, considering that the US president recently, Mr. Donald Trump, hosted General Asim Munir,
just an army chief of
an army chief of a country, for lunch, and having discussed foreign policy with him over the elected prime minister of Pakistan. What does it speak? You are legitimizing something which is undemocratic, unconstitutional, even for the country of Pakistan, even if you call it sham of a democracy. So our entire delegation had just one goal, which was to say that please prioritize terrorism. Terrorism comes in all its forms. It's not just the Pahalgam form of terrorism where they violently attack and on the basis of communal lines, where they're trying to, the idea was not just to kill people, the idea was also to divide our nation as per our religions, which again we defeated. Operation Sindoor was a very targeted, measured, precise attack on those terror hubs which are designated by the United Nations. The same United Nations which now has the temporary member Pakistan and is chairing, I think, and vice-chairing anti-terror operations as part of a committee. So what does it speak? The hypocrisy of it all. On one hand, we say we are fighting terrorism. On the other hand, we are making them partners in terrorism sanctions. So that is what we went to tell the world and tell government officials, tell the think tanks, tell the media, that it's time we all prioritize terrorism before it eats the entire world. One side of the world is facing wars. The other side is facing the worst kind of violence that can happen through radicalization, through fundamentalism, through indoctrination, and through these terror activities.
Eric, you're in charge of South Asia in the Federal Foreign Office, so I'm wondering, how did you experience this day in April and the following days, and what is the impact of this on the German-Indian relationship?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was posted to India in 2008 when Mumbai happened, and I had stayed several times at that hotel, so I knew people there who actually died in this attack, and of course this has also shaped my view on this conflict to a large degree, I must say. And I've then worked on Afghanistan for a long time, and in Afghanistan too, when we simply knew that Pakistan was not the partner it pretended to be in this conflict to the West or to other countries involved. So I do agree that the look onto Pakistan must become more honest from all sides, and it is important that we pressure the Pakistani government to do something against terrorism. Priyanka Chaturvedi just said the army might actually actively support terrorism. This is something that cannot be tolerated by any of India's partners, because I think if we call India our partner, we have to take a stance here in this conflict. I do not say that we should give up relations with Pakistan. We do not want to destabilize Pakistan. We do not want to destabilize the region, but we cannot be somewhat free-floating when a conflict is exacerbating. I would like to turn this thing round as well. On the other hand, we also believe that to make this partnership more valuable for all sides, also India must sometimes take stronger stances on issues that concern us. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is one in which India has not really taken a position that would help our efforts in it. And there may be other situations from both sides where we believe we've sailed through out of complacency, out of historic links with other countries that make it difficult to somehow change track. But if we want this partnership to work, there will sometimes not be a solution which isn't difficult, and we need to take it.
Yeah, if I may just add something. Firstly, I was also in Berlin early this month. I'm sorry, I'm getting so confused because there's been so much travel involved. And I would like to thank the German government for coming forward and standing in solidarity with India with regards to what happened in April in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir. So all thanks to our German partners in understanding the challenges that we face back home. In terms of, I just want to differentiate the two. I do agree, y'all may have a feeling that India hasn't taken a stance. However, the Prime Minister has visited both Russia, Ukraine, and spoken about it not being the time for war. Having said that, there's one fundamental difference. Russia's act is an act of aggression. Pakistan continues to abet, aid, and also finance terrorism, which is, I think we all understand the difference between the two. Terrorism impacts not just civilian lives of people across the world, but this aggression that we see coming from Russia, of course, we're seeing this now replicate in various other formats in various other places. However, having said that, we must appreciate the fact that despite differences on certain things, we do converge on various other challenges that the world faces, and we need to converge together to have a stronger outlook towards, like I said, towards more peace and stability globally.
But what Eric has mentioned, I could imagine that you have heard this quite frequently during your travels, that the Russian aggression that Ukraine is feeling was mentioned by your German interlocutors, for example, during your trips. Does it change anything, like the situation between India and Pakistan and the solidarity that you have now mentioned coming from Germany, in how India reflects about the war in Ukraine?
No, we are very clear about any war across any part of the world, that there is a rules-based order. United Nations came up post-World War II to ensure this kind of aggression could be controlled. So we need to work, we need to re-understand the entire global order that we keep speaking about, those who are sitting at the UNSC table, to be able to hold such countries to account. India on its own is also speaking up on various other challenges that we are seeing globally, whether it's from Israel, whether it's Iran, whether Russia, whether Ukraine. So having said that, India is playing its part, but I just was trying to differentiate between acts of terror versus acts of aggression. Acts of aggression can be handled by agencies such as the United Nations. That was the fulcrum of formation of United Nations. And are they failing us is a question that we really need to ask ourselves, and if we need to reform those agencies, how do we do that?
Maybe that's a moment to go back a little bit, because the Indian foreign minister also explained during his visit to Berlin that India and Germany need to assume global responsibility, and that's kind of what I'm hearing here. He said the old 911 number is not going to work anymore, and I think he referred to the United States. Ambika, do you see some prospects for this joint global leadership, for example, in the UN, that was mentioned now quite a couple of times, between India and Germany? Both are part of G4. India is also providing some of the most peacekeepers in the United Nations. Germany is now the biggest ODA donor. Do you see some room for joint responsibility in that area?
Yeah, thanks. The one good thing about not being a politician or a bureaucrat is that I can answer questions a little bit differently and not be so much worried about my job back home. The reason I had put up my green card for is Donald Trump currently causing the greatest uncertainty in the world. And I love the fact that no matter what we're talking about, Trump will still always have some sort of presence, right? Man doesn't even realize how much presence he has right now. But the reason I put it up is not, I think for the reason that many other people might have done it, it's not about the uncertainty. And Eric, you're absolutely right in that there are many uncertainties right now. You mentioned China, you mentioned Russia. I would mention things like, climate change and piracy as well in terms of uncertainty. But for me, I think it's the unpredictability of the person itself. And when you have so many other kinds of crises, an unpredictable factor can be a very huge exacerbating factor, right? And I think then to answer your question about what India and Germany, how can they come together and sort of work within this system, I think we have a lot of then potential to be able to manage that uncertainty, that unpredictability, whether it is in today's day and age might be coming out of, an interesting person like Donald Trump, but tomorrow it could be somebody else. And how do we do that is coming to your question. I'm not necessarily sure the UN is that place to do it, simply because I'm not necessarily sure the UN is the agency it once was set out to be and was meant to be. It needs a lot of reform. But till we get to that place of a lot of reform, there's a lot of other things that we can do, and India and Germany are already doing. Whether that is looking at joint action on climate change, for example, right? And that's a big question. But I will say specifically, we've been doing a lot of work, for example, together on green energy transitions. We do a lot of work together on looking at gender empowerment programs in Africa and parts of the Indo-Pacific. There's trilateral discussions that India and Germany are having on various other groupings, whether it's with Australia, whether it's with Japan, whether it's with our partners in Latin America. These are very unusual movements that have been happening over the last few years, and I think a lot of these movements will create that change going forward. While we are still all fighting about what the UNSC needs to look like, how do we reform, where do we go from here with the UN? Is it defunct? Does it need to shut shop, or does it need to reinvent itself? I mean, that's a whole discussion that, of course, we still need to have. But till we wait for all of that to resolve and fix itself, I think we need to move in some of these other spaces. And India and Germany have a lot of... And the reason I say this is simply because of the disagreement we have seen on this stage, but in the last few years, is despite the fact that India didn't give the kind of reaction when it came to the war in Ukraine that the German government would have liked, that a lot of other European governments would have liked, there was a lot of, and I can say this freely, there was a lot of statements that were made and reassurances that were given that were not very public, that I know was appreciated on both sides. There was a lot of reassurance from the German government that came to India after the attack in April, but at many other instances. A lot of these things are not always public, but they are what actually goes to build the relationship. There's a lot of also cooperation that happens at the back end when there are big events going on in other parts of the world, and I'd like to even talk about potential issues that might arise in East Asia, for example, a region we haven't really touched upon right now, when it comes to problems if we talk about Congo, for example, and we don't really think about like India, Germany cooperating when it comes to Congo, but there is a line of communication on that. So that is what I would say keeps, that potential of how we can collaboratively shape that global order. It might not be super public, it might not be super flashy, but it's actually what will move that needle.
Mm-hmm. And we will certainly come back to many of the topics, or I'll at least try, that you've mentioned, for example, climate. But as it seems to be so essential for the relationship or the stance of India when it comes to the war in Ukraine, about which we have talked now, that it has a very strong defense relationship with the former Soviet Union, now Russia. I want to touch upon this topic first, because it has increasingly become a topic also for the bilateral relationship, India and Germany, the defense cooperation. And I have prepared another statement for the audience and also for the panel, which is Germany should expand military cooperation with Germany. So if you agree to this statement, you can raise your green card, and if you are not, then your red card. And I see many green cards, but also some red cards. And the whole panel agrees on this. Okay, it's interesting because we also do some public opinion polling at Körber-Stiftung and the Berlin Pulse survey. And we know from that the German public in general, in a representative survey, is very skeptical about defense cooperation and sending weapons to other countries, for example, in general. So I feel that in this audience, it's slightly more in favor of military cooperation with India. If we think about, again, the visit of your Indian foreign minister to Berlin, he described the Indo-German defense security partnership as off and on relationship. Now, Eric, I was wondering, is this something that is likely to change in the near future? And the audience seems to be pretty convinced of this, but how would you convince the broader German public that this is maybe something necessary to do?
On and off, I wouldn't really say. I mean, unless one wants to say it was off for a very long time and now it is on. Yeah, but I don't think it will go back. Okay. I think it is understandably difficult for us, and it was difficult for a government, but it's also difficult for Germans in general to accept that 80 years after the end of World War II, Germany is suddenly asked by others to take a more decisive stance on international conflicts, either by helping to intervene itself, as we did in Afghanistan, for instance, or by supporting other countries that fight their own fights in their regions with equipment, for instance, or with training and other military cooperation. We also don't really have the means to intervene as yet. And I mean, I'm sure everybody here has followed the discussions over the past few weeks about the extent that military spending should or could have in our budget. And that, of course, comes at the expense of other things. But I don't think that's so. I don't think this is the issue. The issue to me seems to be that really we are a bit wary of taking this responsibility, which will come also with pain for us, which will come also with difficult questions to be resolved by our parliament. And going this way with India was a long way too. And we decided only a few years ago, one could say roughly 3 years ago, to suddenly expand by a lot the military cooperation with India in terms of supplying arms, especially. The numbers have increased sevenfold in 3 years only, from a relatively low level. But I mean, it's also not nothing. It's I think now about 210 million euros a year. And why did this happen about 3 years ago? Because we saw exactly what you just mentioned, that India, to a large extent, because of historic reasons, depends on arms supply from Russia. And if we want to ask India to be, to an extent, in our camp, India doesn't really choose camps, but it is certainly a country with whom we share many values. If we want to give it an alternative, we must also offer something. We cannot just say, okay, you must not take any arms from Russia, but we also don't want to deliver it ourselves because we want to have clean hands. Yeah? So this was a difficult way for us, and we are simply not yet where both countries might want to be. I think it should also be coupled with a much more pronounced discussion on security issues. We have also shied away from this for a long time. Now we have entered with the Indian Foreign Ministry, but also with the Defense Ministry, a regular discussion on conflicts in the world, which will hopefully help us to understand each other's position and sometimes also find a common one. And if these two go together, then I think it does make sense.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned discussing security issues that are going on in the world, and I think one that especially these days one cannot forget and that becomes so obvious is the situation in the Middle East. So I want to turn to you, Priyanka, and ask you if you can imagine that there is some coordination between India and Germany to ease tensions in the Middle East. The German Chancellor yesterday said that there is no reason for us, Germany, to criticize Israeli and US airstrikes on Iran. Would the Indian government agree? Would you agree as an opposition leader? And do you see some room for cooperation on this issue?
So in terms of India having a stance, it has been pretty clearly stated by our Ministry of External Affairs that we have asked both sides to ensure that there is de-escalation. We've also spoken about the need to to ensure there's stability in that region. We must understand the entire European region as well as India and Global South are connected with the Middle East. And we cannot have a place destabilized the way it has. And then India has also come forward to say that if there's anything that they can do, and a conversation that the Prime Minister of India had with the President of Iran, I think the Prime Minister of Iran, was on similar lines, that we need to de-escalate and diplomacy is the only way forward. Let me again reassure you, as wherever India is concerned, India does the dialogue. Wherever it's needed, we are engaging. As long as our cooperation leads to longer term stability. But just going back to the military cooperation with India, I just want to say a couple of things here with regards to us buying arms from X, Y, Z. That's another narrative that we can have. But now India itself is manufacturing a lot of arms, a lot of weaponry. And you saw that happen during the drones that were coming from Pakistan, that our air radar system worked perfectly. It was totally made in India. So those are cooperations we can look at. We can also look at cooperation in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of cybersecurity. India is leading on that front. AI is going to be a huge, huge disruptor in the near future. I mean, it's already disrupting a lot of conversations. Those are things where Germany and India can definitely collaborate, and I can say this without hesitation, that India has moved leaps and bounds forward on that particular space. So those are, collaborations that you can look at even without thinking about the larger perspective. But when we talk about dynamism, there are various parts of cooperation in terms of even defense and military. So in terms of national security, ensuring national sovereignty, those are things that India can definitely cooperate, and we can keep our little differences about one particular nation that we keep hyphenating, talking about. We can keep that aside, and we can work on collaboration. And the rest, I think Middle East needs to be stable. We need to have, we cannot afford to have instability there. And right now we see a ceasefire. We've seen a call for ceasefire by, again, President Trump. And hopefully, we are not going to descend back into the chaos that we saw in the last 48 hours.
Mm. But is Germany a partner that you see India turning to when it comes to easing tensions? I'm not sure if I heard a response on that.
I don't know how eager is Germany to want to get into, stepping into a Middle East issue and wanting to have a say there, or whether it has a skin in the game to ensure that it would want to be playing an active role. So that is something, would Germany want to step outside of EU and take a call on this, is also something that we would leave to Germany. But India on its own has taken a stance and has also offered any kind of, assistance that the countries would need, because India enjoys a good relationship with Israel, India enjoys a good relationship with Iran. So if there is a good relationship that we enjoy, and if it can benefit in bringing stability, then happy to ensure there's dialogue that happens.
Eric, you mentioned this discussion on different security issues worldwide. Do you see, on the other hand, the Middle East as a place where India and Germany then start this discussion of security issues in other regions, or to which example did you refer to when you just talked about this before?
Well, there's quite many. I mean, when the foreign minister came, I think the whole range of issues was discussed, some more in detail, of course, than others. But there's also regular consultations between the foreign ministries on working level, on regions of the world that we actually didn't talk about much before. I mean, somebody mentioned Africa, you did earlier. India obviously has a huge engagement, and especially in Eastern Africa. We have it too, to some extent, but it's not been combined yet, and we have certainly not looked at the East African coast as part of the Indo-Pacific for a long time, but understanding that the Indo-Pacific actually really involves the Indian Ocean too, even though many people, when they talk about the Indo-Pacific, usually think of East Asia, and the Pacific Ocean is important for us to come to a conversation with India about security issues that might emanate from the Gulf or from Africa as well.
Cooperation between Germany and India and Africa sounds like triangular cooperation, which happens a lot in the climate area. So I want to use the last couple of minutes that we have before we open up the floor to talk also about climate cooperation. Something that I would like to understand, Ambika, is India wants to reach its developed country status by 2047, but it also has set a net zero emissions goal for 2070. Can you explain us how do these two things will work together?
You'll have to ask the government that.
So you're skeptical about it. Tell us why.
Yes. I mean, I think they're good. It's good to have ambitious goals. India being a developed country, and what that actually means is one can debate. Is developed when you reach a certain financial status. GDP number is developed when everybody has, a certain income, daily income, annual income, sorry, it has to how we calculate it, is developed based on infrastructure. What is developed, I think there might be somewhat different matrices, but 2047 is because then it's 100 years of independence. So it's a nice goal in that sense to have. our climate ambitions, we've had staggered ambitions, but very ambitious goals again for 2070. Now 2070 to many might seem kind of far away. To some it's not, especially for a very young population in India. So again, I think it's good to have these ambitious goals. Whether we are able to realize them is, I mean, it would depend on how we act as a country in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the next decade is really what will matter. It will shift the needle, especially on the climate side. Our goals for 2025 have not yet been achieved. They will not be. Our goals for 2030 as well on some of our climate ambitions. Right now we are far behind. But that's only because we set goals that I think as a country were sort of unrealistic. If we actually tempered them a little, you can say then we will achieve pretty much all of our goals for the every 5-year cycle. But what are these goals that we actually want to achieve? I think it's important to ask that question as well. Are they goals only on renewable energy? Do we have a certain amount of solar power, hydropower, wind power, and so we are using less gas and coal? Then I think that's a goal that ultimately we will get to a certain extent. I mean, we're not going to completely phase out gas and coal. It's unrealistic given our economy and our size and our needs. Also, some of our partners' needs that use our gas and coal to a certain extent. But if that's the only goal, then fine. But I think when you talk about climate, you have to look at it from a much broader angle. Are we looking at it from a water security goal, food security goal, health security, gender security goal, ease of living, our urban transformation goal? Are our cities ready for the kind of population growth that we're going to see 70% of our population by 2030 in our urban spaces? No, when you look at it from those goals, then I do not think that we are quite there yet. There are lots of little blocks that are being put in place in India that if they all come together in a nice puzzle format where you place them all, then yes. But right now, those blocks are not really talking to each other in terms of those climate goals when you talk about health stuff that's happening a little bit here, or water, or the food. So there needs to be a lot more coordination. And to bring it back to the whole India-Germany question, I think in that we have then a lot of ability to work with Germany, because Germany for several years now has had actually pretty good coordination. And I know a lot of Germans sometimes disagree with me, but I work with some of the agencies in this country on what coordination between different aspects of climate looks like, right? And there is some decent level of coordination, and I think we can. Can you give one
concrete example?
So when you have decisions taken within the Environment Ministry on certain aspects of green technology, usually ministries don't always talk to each other in many countries, but there has been some decent level of cooperation between the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of the Department of Climate Change, also the Department and Ministry of looking at gender-related projects, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I know this because I have worked on that project with all of these different departments. And that level of coordination is not always super common around the world, and I've seen that level of coordination happen to a certain extent in Germany, and I think that's something that's quite interesting, these frameworks that have been created that can actually be translated to a certain extent, again, contextualized then in India, for us to be able to reach these ambitious goals of being developed by 47 and then climate goals by 2070. Are we all going to get to reaching our climate goals globally? Not at all. Nobody's on track at all. The ones who are on track is only countries that had, I would say, very unambitious goals. I mean, if that's the way you want to look at it, that's fine.
I feel that the optimism on stage is fading a little bit.
No, I mean, I'm still very optimistic.
No, because I have a very differing point of view from what she's offering, but please.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic because I work in this space, so I know what is happening on the ground. But I do not think that because we have ambitious goals, we should scale them back to say, have unambitious goals, so then we can say we have achieved them. I think for a country like India, we have to have very ambitious goals. And we might not always achieve all of them, but they will be achieved, at some stage. And I think that's the right way to go forward.
I give you 20 seconds before opening it
20
up.
seconds is short time. All I'd like to say is that the 2070 goal that where we phase out total net zero is what we're speaking about. The 2030 goal that we're working on, which is about 500 gigawatts of alternate energy besides our dependence on fossil fuels, is absolutely on target in India. In India, we must understand the struggle we are coming from, right from a nation not having enough energy security to a nation which is now moving leaps and bounds because of the sheer ambitious goal that has been set forward to move towards alternate forms of energy. Please understand this idea of climate change. Of course, it impacts my nation tremendously in all formats and all aspects. However, if you look at our per capita emissions vis-a-vis what was coming from whether US, Europe, China, etc., it's way lesser. Our entire concept of life, as we understand it back home in India, is to respect nature in all its forms. Our country prays to all 5 elements of nature. So for us, it is very inherent. So for us, climate adaptation has become easier. Transition to alternate climate resilient crop has become easier. Our dietary habits has become easier. So I would want to end it in a positive way, that yes, India set a very ambitious target for itself because India feels that it is a responsible country which will set other countries in motion in the global south to be able to be equally committed. However, we are also expecting that support coming in terms of climate funds that were promised to all the countries such as ours to be in place for us to meet ambitious goals. We will do that. We are very positive about it. I'm a member of the opposition. I'm extremely invested in the idea of India, adapting to all of this, right from the gender narrative to the public transport narrative, etc. But I cannot deny the fact that a country which is still developing has taken up this ambitious challenge, working on it, collaborating with other nations, and is also hoping that they will understand that we also need the funds to move forward in terms of transition. But in terms of our targets, we are matching our targets.
And Germany is one of the countries that
absolutely,
has,
it's one of our best trading partners as far as climate tech is concerned.
That has promised the 10 billion, and I wanted to talk about that, but I also want to open it finally up to the floor. So we might need to talk about that between us or outside with the audience, or maybe someone raises a question on this. We have also not talked about emerging technologies as a factor of uncertainty. So if someone has a question on that, I will give priority to that person. But let me just explain you. If you have a question, raise your hand. I have colleagues in the room walking around with microphones. I will group some questions in the interest of time. And if you're joining us online, you can also send a question, if you're quick, using this email address, and my colleague will read it out loud. Please remember to be concise and that every question ends with a question mark. Here we go. And I see the first raised hand here in the front. Aino, please. Microphone is coming. Please give us a second.
Yes. 2 months ago, I have been for the first time in India, and it was really amazing welcome because the people I met, I talked to, they are so friendly, open, just because I'm German, maybe too. So for me, cooperation means a good handling between face-to-face or human being to human being, and this is one really important thing. Concerning technology is my question.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, genau. I have to give 2 sentences. All of us know that our companies here in Germany had for 20, 30 years good cooperations with China, and we gave a lot of technology know-how to Chinese people. And since political things changed, we now know that Mr. Putin is now one of our biggest enemies, for especially for me as a German, and China and Russia are very close because we don't have to discuss now. But I fear a little bit, and this is my question. Let's say we give technology to you. Of course, we get something back because you are well educated in IT and so on. How can we make sure that politically you are in the BRICS community with Russia? How can we be sure that a cooperation is for longer terms good in the sense of that you don't deal with our enemy?
Okay, understood. Next question. Thank you. Here in the second row.
Ich bin das nicht gewohnt. Mich interessiert die Frage, inwieweit die Schattenflotte ja sehr viel Öl nach Indien transportiert und das zurückkommt als Benzin, als Petroleum, also als Benzin, das wir dann hier auch kaufen und also zweifach damit Putins Regimes, Putins Kriegsführung unterstützen finanziell.
Und möchten Sie in der Antwort gerne hören von der deutschen Perspektive, wieso wir das kaufen, oder von der indischen Perspektive, wieso das...
Beide.
Okay.
Vielen Dank.
Ja. Und hier vorne in der ersten Reihe sehe ich noch eine.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask a question that sees the world as it is, because all this discussion is taking place still believing a world where we are not in that kind of a world, because this is a kind of, I think we're in a critical juncture, right? We are having ceasefire announcements happening on Truth Social. We are having and that the rules-based order has not lived up to its name, and there is a lot of skepticism. So at this point, when the rules are up for grabs, there is such uncertainty, and we are in an age of polycrisis, as you all mentioned. In such an age, can intermediary powers like Germany and India come together, step up to the plate, and start creating at least a certainty in terms of rules and regulations, rules of business, good practices, which they can work under? That is my first question, because here, if you get hamstrung by values, can you actually create that situation? Second, it's on short on technology. When we talk, I deal with AI regulations and governance, and I'm trying to figure out how India and Germany are cooperating with each other, and I see that regulatory sandboxes are coming up. But is that a sustainable solution? Because this is a general purpose technology you're talking about, AI. And India is going in a big way in an AI-first economy, AI-first country. Can India and Germany come together on AI regulations, going up beyond the EU regulations, and cooperate on critical tech? Thank you.
Thank you. And there is one here in the middle.
Thank you very much for an interesting discussion. I have a question which is rather critical, perhaps, coming from the perspective of civil society rather than the government. My question is there any space for conversation between Germany and India, between the governments or representatives, about critical issues within the different countries? So, for example, we read in our papers about religious bias in India towards minorities, the freedom of press. That could be a question. And regarding India, I would like to know whether there are issues you would like to raise towards the German society, the refugee issue, for example, or other issues. So my question is there a space for a critical discussion about values of different countries in different settings?
Thank you. I give it back to the panel. Thank you for your questions. So we had The diversification that should not happen with the wrong partner who is cooperating with the enemy. We had Germany buying oil from India that comes indirectly from Russia or petroleum-based products. We had intermediate powers, and if they can create creativity on rules and regulatory sandboxes. And the last question on the do we have space for conversation about critical issues? Maybe we start with that last one. And Priyanka, I think that's a perfect one for you.
As someone from the member of the opposition back home in India. So I'd just like to say one thing. You mentioned that would India also want to raise certain issues in regards to what's happening in Germany, especially the migration crisis, the refugee crisis, as well as you raised questions about back home that you all might have about India. So firstly, India has had a long-standing principle that we shall not interfere in any domestic issues of countries we enjoy a diplomatic relationship with. And I'm sure the governments you'll elect, because you'll are democracies, would be able to handle those challenges. And if they can't handle those challenges, they'll be thrown out by the people of that country. That's the beauty of democracy. Back home in India, as far as minorities are concerned, let me be very clear about the fact which I also mentioned during the terrorism attack that happened in Pahalgam. The precedence to that was a very poisonous speech about why Pakistan came about, why Pakistan was carved out of India, because of two religions not being able to see eye to eye, being absolutely different from each other, which is Hinduism and Islam. And that is why the two-nation theory. Just post that, we saw the Pahalgam terror attack, and in the violent attack, before a person was shot down, he was asked for his religion. The idea being, let's India, there's this entire sentiment, oh, India is a divided country and there is religious bias. So let's shoot them down and there will be instability. What happened for Pakistan especially was entire countries stood united against the hate and the agenda of Pakistan. So minorities in India stood behind the government. And let me tell you, our minorities, particularly Islam, Muslims, 100 million in population. We all stood together, whether it was the Sikhs, whether it was the Christians, whether it was the Parsis, whether it was the Jains, whether it was the Hindus, whether it was the Muslims. We all stood together. And yes, if there are challenges, if there are some biases that we see, as a member of the opposition, I'm the first one, and I'm quite thrilled with that. I raise it. So there are consequences that we also see in terms of change of governments in various states, lesser numbers of votes for the elected government. But however, we have a very strong idea of election systems that we work on, and democracy prevails. If we don't like the government, hopefully the people of the country will get together and change that government. So that is the beauty of democracy, which we can't say for, let's say, our neighbor, China.
And on the diversification, it shouldn't happen with the wrong partner. What do you tell people here to make them more comfortable diversifying and then choosing India as a partner?
Again, I think diversification should also depend on the core values of any country. If you are democratic, if you believe in rules-based order, you understand, that there could be differences in approach, but the intent is common, then there can be no way that you cannot have a long, stable, and reliable partnership. But your question was also a question which was challenged by the next question that came with regards to, I did not want to politely talk about that, the German buying oil from India, etc. But that is a question which we all will have to deal with sooner or later.
So maybe Eric can say something about it. How can you explain, and I have also some numbers on that, I mean, it's quite obvious when you look into statistics that India is on the first hand buying more Russian oil, and that a lot of the Russian oil comes especially to the Netherlands, but I think also to other European countries. So why are we doing this? Will we stop doing this? What can you tell us about this concern?
Well, I think it's important to know that India has not violated any sanctions with that. There's an oil price gap, which keeps the oil price viable for the economies in the West. It's basically very much in our own interest to have India refine Russian oil to keep the overall prices for energy acceptable for the economies in the West. So I don't think India would be to blame. It makes good business with it, that's for sure, or businesses in India do. But it is in total unison with the international community. There's no violation of any overall decisions here.
And what about European countries buying from India?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I might have a private opinion on this issue as well. I mean, I don't necessarily understand the logic either. Yeah? If one wants to fight an enemy, to still buy its products, yeah, be it through India or directly. But of course, we also all remember the fear that we all had when Russian gas was simply suddenly not coming in anymore, and when Nord Stream 2 was closed, that the energy supply for our industry would not be sufficient. So I think this is the solutions that have been taken for the moment. I'm also not an expert on this, but it is the lesser evil because with ruining our economies, we would also not have the war effort, to be honest.
And if I'm not mistaken, this question is also part of the current sanction package that is negotiated by the EU Commission to ban these petroleum-based.
Yes, but not all of it. There's a very special part of it that might be banned if this decision is taken.
And we also had this question on the space on conversation. So you must be in a lot of conversations with the Indian government. Do you have any experience of space for talking about these critical issues that were raised here from the audience?
Well, I don't want to hide behind these conversations are of course confidential, but I can really say that there's a lot of space in these conversations also for more difficult topics. We also have a long-standing dialogue that is led by the European Union, actually on human rights issues, and both countries are actually looking at each other in the UN processes on human rights. There's the country reviews that are taking place every, 2 or 3 years, where both Germany and India are subjected to the scrutiny of or by other countries on what other countries may see as an infringement on human rights, and we do ask each other questions there as well.
Mm-hmm. Ambika, we have some questions left. Tell me if you want to answer them. We have the intermediate powers question, if they can create some certainty on rules and regulatory aspects, and then also the regulatory sandboxes. Do you think that India and Germany can come together on regulation?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer on the regulation, but I will just say that given the kind of partnership we are seeing between the two countries on a number of different aspects, there's no reason why we wouldn't or couldn't perhaps have this discussion as well going down the line. The whole question of where we go with artificial intelligence, is it even artificial anymore? I think that's a big discussion that's happening. I was shown a video a few days ago, and I thought everybody in that video was a human being, and it turns out that nobody in that video was a human being, right? So where do we go from here? I think if we look at the trajectory of this relationship between India and Germany, and I've been working on this, and I realized a few days ago, it's now been 15 years. So I've seen that trajectory. It's been slow growth, but it's an upward growth. And I have no doubt that this is also part of the conversation, and then it can go somewhere from here. Now, whether we can push forward to create that regulation globally, I don't think so, because I don't think globally there will be regulation on these aspects. But there is a need for that conversation, and perhaps as partners we could put that on that agenda and say this, let's talk about it. And so then to come to your question on the state of the world as it is, I don't think that this panel at all is in any disillusion as to the state of the world. We know what it's like. There are people, three of us, work in very different spaces. I mean, you have a politician, a bureaucrat, and then I would call myself a researcher, a think tanker, and we all work together very closely. I don't think there's any disillusion on what it is. I think the fact that we are not completely pessimistic should be a good thing, right? Because there is still hope for something positive to come out of the crisis that we are all in today. Can India and Germany then do rules together? I mean, I wouldn't say we could create those rules, because I feel like there will still be some level of disagreement between India and Germany as to what those rules could look like, which then might answer your question as well a little bit on whether we see differences in each other's countries and problems that we might raise. And Priyanka is absolutely right in that what is domestic in Germany is domestic in Germany. It's not our problem, it's not our concern, unless you were to ask us for an opinion on that. But if I were to say as a non-government person, the one thing that could come up is that we see a certain level of hypocrisy on what you think the rules are supposed to be and who they apply to, right? So if one had to pick one, I would say that is important. So can we do rules together? Can we together design those rules? We could, again, I think, put it on the agenda to say we need to have a discussion on what rules are supposed to be, what new rules are supposed to be given the state of the world today, not what they were like 75 years ago. But will we agree on every single one of them? I don't think so, not quite yet. But that's the beauty then of having a much more collective multilateral system, is that you have many people that come together for that conversation. And I think we do collectively have the power to be able to call for that conversation.
And if I may add, India and France they've co-hosted and are co-chairing the AI Action Summit. So even Germany we can also look at working with Germany, because India definitely would want to collaborate with various countries on this the idea of regulation and controlling AI rather than AI controlling the world.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that this topic was brought up in the end by you, the audience, because I think it's increasingly affecting all of us even more, and then also the German-India relationship. Our time is up, but we have the opportunity to talk about some of these aspects outside, having a drink. And I want to say thank you to the stellar panel for joining us from far away, from middle far away and from not so far away, and also to you, the audience, for your very interesting questions in the end, and for your interest coming here, and also to my colleagues who have supported and co-organized this event tonight, Leona Harting, Aino Garcia, and Clara Farias. And if you are interested to learn more about India, because as you've seen, there are many, many topics to discuss, I recommend to take a look at the website of the India Week of the City of Hamburg. There are many more events happening during the course of this week, and I'm sure you'll find some more interesting events to attend. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next time.